Hey there, welcome to the My Risk Advisor podcast. This podcast is for anyone in the financial planning ecosystem with a focus on life risk insurance. I'm your host, Phil Thompson, Director and Financial Advisor at Sky Wealth, and I've been on a business journey over the last few years going from a struggling holistic advice firm with one staff member, considering packing it all in, to pivot the business now to being one of Australia's leading specialist insurance advice firms with over 7 advisors, 30 team members, and helping hundreds of clients every single year get important insurance cover in place. I am unashamed to say that this podcast is so I can continue to grow and develop as an advisor and a business owner as I interview some incredibly smart individuals. So keep on listening so you can learn alongside me. All right, today I've got an awesome guest, Nathan Fradley from Fradley Advice, and also one of the hosts of Challenging the Standard podcast. If anyone doesn't listen to that, definitely have a listen. So thanks for coming on, mate.
No worries, Phil. You've been a guest on our podcast. It was about time we popped over and said g'day, right?
I have. And so today I want to get you on. Some of the guests I get on, it's literally like, hey, I like talking to you. I want to hear about your story more. Why don't we just hit record at the same time? So tell me about your journey at Advice. Maybe people may have heard about you and what you've done, but just give us a kind of a rough overview of what you've done in Advice.
All right, I'll do like the 1 minute version. So started off...
I'm timing.
Yeah, good. Started off straight out of uni into, one of those sort of aspirational call center, you'll become an advisor here jobs for a firm that later got done. Worked there for like 2 months. And then ended up at NAB. So I was one of the youngest ARs appointed in the country at NAB, or the youngest at the time. So like 21, started giving advice, and 2.5 years later, senior advisor, and was like, I don't think I can stay in this bank environment. I think I've got to expand my horizons. So, stupidly or bravely, I don't even know what to call it, or both, I started my own practice, bought an existing business, gutted it, rebuilt it, all the highs, all the lows that come with that fun stuff, all the learnings, and ran that for 6.5 years, I want to say. Yeah, 6.5 years. And that was why I'm financial planning, and really just sort of, we gutted it. Like, there was a lot of low fee paying clients. It was right through FOFA. There was so many changes to the industry. Rebuilt it from the ground up, and then sold to Tribeca in December 21. Worked there for 2 years, and then I've got a separate business in ethical investments called Ethos, which demanded a lot more of my time, and so decided to hang up the employment aspect and move into this, back into being self-employed. And really it was all about, in advice, what do I like doing? Where can I add a lot of value? Like, where are my skills sitting? And how do I approach that as something that I can do while I'm working on this app? And that it just ended up being like most of the work I like doing, and the people that came to me were like complex emotionally, complex technically, cases around aged care, divorce, estates, that kind of stuff. And so I built my business around that.
I guess, is there anyone who's not complex emotionally? Maybe an increased complexity of emotions.
Yeah.
Complex.
Yeah, 100%. So like, I'm talking like there's either, I mean, obviously in the case of divorce, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to these sorts of things. There's instability, there's uncertainty, there's potential, DV issues or financial abuse issues, all that kind of stuff. In aged care and estates, there's infighting. You're not just working with that person on their things and not worrying too much about whether or not they get along with their brother. That black sheep sibling is 100% a consideration in the advice you give. And you're really sort of layering on that complexity. So that's where we're getting into. It's very difficult to scale that work because of the individual complexity, which is there.
Yeah, and it was one of these things back when I was giving a holistic advice. One of the things I actually looked at moving into is, hey, is it worthwhile doing a diploma, degree, some sort of further study in psychology? Because advice is so, money is so intrinsically emotional, and it involves so much more. And so being very, having a high level of EQ when you're working with clients is super important. And to be honest, even when we're doing insurance in our business today, it's like all of our kind of coaching we do with our advisors is all about soft skills,
hey, you said this and it could have made the client feel this way, or it could have been seen this way. And, how do we not use acronyms? How do we not use jargon? How do we make it as easy to understand without making the client feel stupid? Like, that's really all the core of what we do at Sky, is thinking about a lot of that stuff. Because at the end of the day, that's what a good financial advice is having that good EQ. And you're just taking it to the extent of working with a really, really difficult one.
Well, I'm picking it up at the event horizon, right? You guys are watching the event horizon. So the same skills that are required to discuss death with someone are being used well before they've passed away. But that idea of, hey, one of the two parents in a situation has passed away, let's walk through what that looks like. That's some very delicate and sensitive topics. That brings in the estate implications. That you're getting someone to imagine that. Now, yes, I'm hypothetical, but it still requires an enormous EQ to softly manage that. And understanding different people it's very easy to become clinical when we deal with it every day. But some people, it's going to be a pretty emotional process.
Yeah, exactly. So, before we go too much into what you're doing today, so you started a business at 23. How did you go about doing that? Was that like an AMP Horizons type of thing? Like, what did that actually look like? How did you go and buy the business?
So I knew a guy from the gym who I trained with relatively regularly, and he had his own business, so I sub-licensed under him. So when I went out, I was I'll just license under you. He paid me my comms. I just started building my business from scratch. And about 3 months in is when they announced that everyone had to do, at our licensee at least, the CFP ethics unit. And so he started doing the ethics unit and decided it wasn't for him and decided to get out of advice. And so it was like, I had this business that, from what I could see and what was in there, it seemed like it was a reasonable price. It was, wasn't a huge business, so it was attainable from a financing perspective. But I went into business with one of the guys in the office there, who I'd become good friends with. He bought half and I bought half. So we built that together. He ran a mortgage broking practice. So I had really good buy-in with him. He's still one of my best friends today. Most businesses, partnerships, a lot of them don't work out. I was very fortunate, just an amazing guy to go into business with. And so we owned that together. So he managed a lot of the administrative stuff. I ran the practice itself, and we worked through the challenges together. And that was really good to have that backing of someone with an established business that also referred and helped us grow.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your opinion. I bought into the business when I was 24. I think I took over an existing business. Now, I don't think that's as common these days. I think it's much harder to get licensed when you're that young, as in to have a licensee take a bet on you when you're that young. Do you think that's a good thing? Well, sorry, do you agree that it's less common today? And then do you think it's a good thing that we're in that space where 23, 24-year-olds can't start their financial advice business? Or do you think, hey, it's actually would be great if we still had that environment?
It's an interesting question because we've got a real dilemma at the moment around, PYs and development of people and all this kind of stuff. But, I rightly or wrongly thought I knew enough to run a practice. I learned a lot really quickly. So there was definitely some hubris to it. I will admit that. But I had some support around me. This guy had been running his practice for a long time. So while it wasn't an advice, that was helpful. But I think getting finance books is a little, I don't know what's available these days. I know it's still out there, but we were really lucky when we got our finance, but we had to put up property as part of the, equation. I think the industry's come a long way from when it was back then. You were buying books that were, had fee components of, there was trail commission still around, on investments, there was commission on insurance. Whereas now, I think a lot more people are just going out on their own and bootstrapping themselves. I'm just going to build up my client base as I go. And maybe there's a bit of, in 2 years' time when my non-solicitation agreement runs out, I'm going to get a handful of extra clients as well. I'm sure that's happening. But I think we're seeing a lot more businesses start up from scratch and go, I've got this much money in the bank, I'm going to do this from scratch because, one of the challenges with buying with finance is you end up with a massive debt, and that cash flow implication on that, especially with interest rates where they are now. But rates on those business loans back when rates were really low were still really high. The terms weren't that favorable. the principal components, that you paid each month were taken out of post-tax profits. So you had to add on tax and provision for that all the time. It killed your cash flow. So there's pros and cons to it. But I think where interest rates are at the moment, lending criteria is, I think people are just as choosing to bootstrap instead of trying to buy practices, which is also a challenge for those exiting the industry from a retirement perspective, is who are they selling to?
Yeah, it is interesting. I try and reflect back and go, I mean, I was similar to you. I was so dumb that I thought I could do it, and I knew what I was doing when I was 24. I had one toddler and a newborn as well. Like, I was just stupid, but you need that naive stupidity to go and do it. And so
I had no responsibility, right? I didn't have no kids. Granted, I bought my property the week before I resigned my full-time job, so I did have a mortgage, but I didn't have that commitment. I thought, here's the time to do it. But you're right. There was so much hubris in it. Like you learnt the trenches, that's for sure.
And that's where it's like, I don't know if it's good that we don't have 23-year-olds going out there and putting out their shingle, giving advice, because the advice that I gave back then is nowhere near what it is today. And that's just the journey of any advisor, I guess. But yeah, it is this interesting kind of push and pull between what is ideal as an industry. Because we don't really want 23-year-olds doing stupid things and making us all look bad. But we also want people to go and be able to, bet on themselves and at least have the avenue to do that, I guess, that we're probably missing a little bit at the moment.
Yeah. I think there's pressure to go fast in careers. It always has been. The younger you are, the faster you want to go. But there is also, taking on $600,000 loan at 22 years or 24 years of age or whatever I was. It's horrifying. On top of your mortgage on your house, it was like I didn't earn any money for a very long time.
And that is the other thing that, I spoke to Doreen Jagovides in the last episode, maybe, depending when this is coming out. But I was asking her about, a number of years in now, are you back to replacing your wage and those questions? And she was extremely candid and honest about it, that it does take a while to actually replace your wage. And so you've got to be prepared for that. We could talk about that all day, but the thing I really want to talk about is, you've kind of gone through this journey. You've, worked for the bank, you've been self-employed, you then sold into another business and worked with them, and now you're out on your own. And we talk on the phone, and I'm kind of like, well, what are you doing with your life? That's kind of the question I ask you. What are you doing with your life?
Literally every 2 weeks, you're like, have you decided what you're doing with your life? I'm like, no, Phil, it's still midlife crisis territory. I got no idea.
Midlife crisis in your early 30s. I love it. But we'll talk about niching into kind of aged care. So help me understand kind of your thinking about that, and you've kind of had this broad brush of emotional complex clients, and aged care advice is very complex. So help me understand the kind of thought process around that.
I've always been an advocate of, you don't choose your clients, they choose you. Rightly or wrongly, some people go, I want to work with this kind of person, they go out and do that. I just paid attention to who was choosing me, and it tended to be the same kind of people. It was 45 to 70-year-old women, usually either in a relationship where he had managed the money a very long period of time and they had gotten anywhere, so she'd taken over. They were going through a divorce, or there was a trigger like an aged care or an estate issue, and they were the eldest daughter and thrust with the financial responsibility because they were in that position in the family. And that tended to be my clients, that 80% of my clients. There's some other common factors in terms of personality types. They tend to be creative. Neurodivergence is really common. Being queer is really common. There's sort of certain areas that tend to be really common, but they were the key drivers. And when I looked at that, what were the problems they were facing? It was either divorce, aged care, or someone died, and it was inheritance with infighting. Like, just normal inheritance, I don't think is that particularly complicated, but in terms of emotional complexity. And so I was like, well, that's who I like working with, and that's the biggest challenges they have. And I like to sort of transactional, take away pain advice, simplify the complex, and sort of move them along work. And so that's where I decided to niche into that. And that also come from years of working on increasingly complex stuff, working hand in hand with lawyers on family law cases, working hand in hand with estate planning lawyers on with executors and their lawyers and things like that. So I got a lot of experience on what the legal aspects that we need to consider when we do it are. and they really tie in. And then, when it comes to most things in life, I kind of, listen to the fates, and when they speak, I listen and I go that direction. The aged care piece is something I've been doing for a while. I've been doing aged care advice for 4 years now. But when you look at the complexity that comes in aged care, there's the rules, right? There's the RADs and the DAPs and all the other fun stuff. But, that's just maths and Centrelink rules. The real complexity comes in is when you've got a brother and sister who, one might be financially literate, one might not really be that into their money, and mum's got 30 grand in the bank and a house, and they need to get her into care and they don't know how to fund it. Now you've got a family and a state issue on top of the RADs and DAPs situation. Or another situation I'm working on at the moment where you've got an enormous sort of asset base, but it's which assets do you sell first, which ones are earmarked for which kids in the will. There's 4 siblings and a very involved spouse. Like there's this sort of tie-ins everywhere that you've got to keep everyone informed, move things through, protect the powers of attorney, make sure they're fully informed, get them the right external support for what we can't do. I've really enjoyed that work. And so I'm just finding myself leaning more and more into it. Within that aged care space, I could comfortably see myself entirely doing that work. Like if that's the direction that my introductions start going, and the more people that find out I do it, get advisors call me, hey, I've got this situation. This is what you do. Yeah. Can you help me with this? And I'll go and work with them, with their client, or I'll, just take it externally and help this client through it. If that was all that came through my door and all I worked on, I would be really, really enjoying my job. And maybe I could answer your question.
Yeah, what you do with your life.
That's right.
And aged care has always been this one where I think as an industry, the 12 years I've been around, aged care has always been that one thing that people, even when everyone wanted to do everything for every individual client, that people always identified aged care as, no, we're not going to do it. I don't really have the time capacity or the volume to understand all of the math behind it. We can get product providers to help us with all the calculators, but let's just get rid of that and outsource it. So that's always been kind of a key area where a lot of advice firms have outsourced. Is that also a part of that decision making, or is it just purely, hey, I just love doing this work, and that's why you just kind of went down that path?
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely, I enjoy doing the work. I really enjoy doing the work. And it's also, you're not eating anyone's sandwich, right? Like people, you can work with advisors with their clients. You can go out to their office and be an external expert, which is far more akin to other industries. When you look at legal fields, everyone really specializes. You bring in the expert where you need them, and then they come whereas in advice, I feel like historically we've tried to do everything and be all things to all people and know everything instead of being good at what we do. And that's fine. But I think this is one area where I do see sometimes people go, yeah, I can do that. I'll pull up a calculator off a product provider website and throw some numbers in and tell someone what it is. And they've missed a key detail, which has undermined the entire thing. It's something that if you get it wrong, you can get it really wrong. And I think that's what's putting people off. It's like, yeah, I get it. And sometimes they'll be like, oh, I could do this. But a lot of the time they're like, I don't get it that well. I think it's something that if you're not doing it regularly, you shouldn't do it at all. It's probably because, especially at the moment, there are rules changing quite regularly, quite consistently, and there's just so much movement in that space. That's probably where I think that there's a level of risk for advisors in that region too.
Yeah, and I think that's where, and the reason for my question about did you choose that because we're seeing a trend towards outsourcing and specialization, or is it because of the love of the work? Because in my own experience, I didn't come from a love of insurance. Because I do it all day, every day. Now I understand it more, so I have much more of an affection towards it and the benefits of it. But I saw it very much, very clearly as this is where advisors are leaving. I kind of see the puck moving towards a specialization model within advice. And so what's the specialization that I feel most advisors won't want to do? And that's insurance. Because of the risk. And aged care and insurance are very similar in terms of the idea that aged care, if you structure it incorrectly, I haven't looked at aged care stuff in a long time, but you kind of can't back out of it. You can't fix it.
Yeah, it's not like if you get something in, an example is like you got 2 parents and they both need to go into care and you put them in on the same day. You can't undo that, but you may have closed off an opportunity to drastically decrease their fees.
Yeah.
So 100%. There's some, and then I think there's the administrative part of it too. Like, one of the reasons people don't like doing insurance is because it can be really time consuming. There can be a lot of back and forth making sure information, and aged care is intrinsically tied to Centrelink. So it has that tie in as well to administrative stuff, where if people aren't equipped for it, it can come very quickly of a time sink. So I definitely think there's an avoidance of it, but I also really enjoy it. So it's probably both. It's like, hey, this is something I enjoy, and if no one else wants to do it, I would love to do this work. That's probably where it comes from.
And I think that's kind of why, similar to that, that's why I believe advisors are referring out more insurance. And again, this could just be confirmation bias. These are the people I'm talking to wanting to refer out. But I do feel like there is a sense of more referring out insurance, because historically, if you stuffed up an insurance policy and something got cancelled, you could probably just get it re-underwritten somewhere else, because underwriting wasn't that hard and pricing was relatively the same thing. These days, if you stuff it up and you get a decline, or you've accidentally cancelled the policy before the new one set up, there's no guarantee we're getting this policy set up. And so the client could literally be uninsurable moving forward if you stuff it up, and because underwriting is so much more difficult. And again, it's why I think historically always aged care was this area of outsourcing for most practices, because we kind of always understood that, the math is not that hard, but we know enough to know that we can be dangerous. And so I guess in the aged care space, help me understand, like, one thing I like to talk about is you don't know what you don't know. And in the aged care space, what are some of those areas that you feel like are maybe not common mistakes you're seeing other advisors do, but common pitfalls that you're like, hey, just be aware that here is where a specialist can come in and really help support the client?
And on that, I would 100% agree with you, by the way. That's why I refer my insurance to you, because I know, A, it's going to get done really well, and by people who are in it every day. And there can be, because I'm not in it every day, there can be little things that go wrong, or little things that could go really right that could substantially improve a client experience. So, completely agree. And I think in this world, it's some of the nitty-gritty Centrelink rules. It's a bit about timing. It's a bit about explanation. And I think it's experience of process. What you're generally dealing with in aged care is no one comes to you 2 years in advance and says, I want to start preparing. I wish they did. You occasionally get someone who asks you a few questions. So I want to start preparing for my aged care journey, and this is what we're going to do. And I've had a handful of clients do it over the time, but it's not a thing. They come to you because someone's just fallen. They're in hospital, and that was 2 weeks ago. The hospital wants to release them, and they've gone, fine, we'll get someone involved. You got to go quick. So you need to be able to allay fears. You need to be able to speak with confidence. You need to be able to say quickly, I've done this. Here's what we're going to do. I've seen this before. Don't worry. And have that confidence. I think that's in itself a small thing, but it's so powerful to know what you're doing, and for someone to be like, good, he's seen this before. And then it's the little things like your rules around entry dates. So, the low means is something that people get wrong all the time. Which isn't particularly complicated unless it is. So low means is based on how much assets you have and whether or not you own a property. But the big part around that is what's called a protected person. Like, is this house included in these calculations or not? And the rules around that tie back to, like, how long have they been there? Are they a carer? What payments do they get? These kinds of things start playing into it, because that can drastically change an outcome and you can get stuff wrong very quickly. And even if it's not, let's say you get it wrong, and you're like, oh, cool, we're wrong, but we can just work with what we've got. That's a terrible client experience. All of a sudden, we're paying more than we thought we were going to pay. What do you mean I have to sell the house? What do you mean? Like, that's a big part of it. I think that if you're really clear and concise on that, you create confidence, and with confidence, you can decrease pressure in a family situation. And that allows them to make more informed decisions, because they're going to have to make some informed decisions on behalf of mum and dad, be that selling a house, be that, moving some shares around, or, even just like they're dealing with mum being like, I want to go back home. Why can't I go home? And that's enough. So there's a lot to it in those little rules. I had a case recently with, are you familiar with age pensioner blind categorization, Phil?
Let's assume I know nothing, because it's a fair assumption to make.
It's not means tested. Like, do people know that? No. Like, he might just brush over that. There's the things like that can, I think that's where the skill set can really come in and be like, this person's got it, they know it. That creates a level of comfort immediately, because most people in this circumstance want to know the numbers are done properly, so they need that confidence. And then you can then listen to the other areas of their life, which is where you can really create value.
And that's where I find it so interesting. And the law profession is somewhat similar. Everyone's called a lawyer, but they have very clear specialization. In financial advisors, we've got the same title, same education, but I don't have a clue about any of this stuff that you're talking about when it comes to aged care. I haven't even looked at aged care for 8 years, like anything to do with aged care for 8 years. And I know you've been around insurance more recently, but if someone hasn't looked at insurance policy for 8 years, they also wouldn't have a clue. And so that's what one thing that is really interesting about financial advisors is starting to be comfortable going, I have no idea about aged care. Like, yes, a financial planner will do that for you, but I'm not the financial planner for you. And just being really confident in what we do and how in the value we provide, and then work with other professionals, spend the effort to find those professionals to help us with that. And just touching on that aged care experience, my nan is 101 years old. She's like a tank. We just can't kill her. So she had a fall, broke her hip, and she was still living at home with my auntie. Broke her hip, was in hospital, exactly that example, and then had to find a care facility for her because, my auntie's working. And then and that's a pretty standard scenario. And then I was in a conversation the other day with friends saying that her mum put herself into care, sorted it all out. And we were kind of talking about how unusual that situation is. Like, it's rare that someone's like, all right, I'm ready to go into care and put all the necessary steps in place. So that's why, as you said, just being all ready, having the systems, knowing what you know to then, hit the ground running is so important.
And you can move quickly because generally you have to. I've got a case I came across this week, and it is literally like, Dad just went from super stubborn, this is what I'm doing, and all of a sudden was like, no, we're moving into care. I don't want to deal with any of this anymore. And just handed it to the eldest son and just put himself in care. Everyone's like, oh, wait, what? And they've had to figure out like where everything is and how it works. And, there's a lot of in the aged care space. It's not just about care. It's about the fact that they've got their 90s. So your nan probably has a bank statement with a, Joan Smith on it. And then she's got one that's J Smith. And then she's got one that's J.A. Smith. And then different, as far as share registers are concerned, different people. There's all those kinds of fun stuff that comes along with it. Yeah.
And I love business. I love talking about business. How is that business scalable?
Yeah. So I think where it comes back to the comparison to that to financial product advice is really different. Financial advice being, licensed to distribute financial product effectively. You've got all your 501(c)(5) considerations around replacement of products and all that kind of thing. That's where a lot of the complexity and documentation comes in. Chances are in an aged care case, you've either got someone who's super complex, who's got shares and investments and property, but at 93, you're probably not touching it unless you're working on what to sell, but you're trying to make the least possible changes so not disrupt too much. But then you've got the other end of the scale, you've got people who've got a house, a bank account, and they're going into care. The aged care component, once you've got your head around it, it's just maths. And if you've got like a aged care, I use the aged care steps software, it's immensely powerful because the number of variables you're dealing with, like with risk advice, you've narrowed it down. We've only got a number of things we can do. So I'm not accounting for all these different variations. I'm just narrowing down what I'm doing. So when it comes to the advice component, the available variables are a lot narrower so that what you have to control for and processes really narrows down. So that allows a scaled approach inside of what would be a relatively complex area. The thing you can't scale is the advice part. But anything that does involve me in a meeting, I can scale. So then it's really just about what I'm doing in my meetings. And that's just my time, really. The rest of it is relatively straightforward at its core.
And I think each individual business owner will need to come to a decision about, do I want to scale this and build out systems and grow a team? Or do I want it to be me and, a few support staff and one advisor or whatever that looks like for them? So it's important for them to, each individual business owner to make their determination. But I always like thinking about scale. Even if you don't want to scale the business, how is it scalable? And something I talk about a lot is like when you do one thing, you can build really clear, defined systems and processes around
Exactly.
it. So only doing aged care, the more you get deeper in it, the more complex it gets, because it is. Everything we do is kind of infinitely complex, but the variables limit the complexity, and therefore
100%.
you can always focus on, something that you'll focus on making better in your business, will be, I don't know, how do I facilitate making them feel comfortable before the meeting? But if you're doing everything, for a lot of people, it's like, well, who cares? Like, that's one of a million things we've got to do before and after this meeting. They just come into the meeting however they come in.
You got to control for that variable. It's like, it's the concept of personalization at scale is, I think there's a really book I liked called Unrealistic Hospitality. It's about restaurants. But it was all about this restaurant, the one best restaurant in the world, by providing the best service. And it's a classic example of one of the staff overheard someone saying, I've come all the way to New York, but I didn't get a New York hot dog. So one of the staff ran out, got a hot dog, they plated it, and they put it on the table. It was all very fancy. But that was because their process was to listen for the thing to personalize, because everything else was standardized. So the things that matter, if I know what's going to happen with Centrelink, I can set the right expectations. If I know what's going to happen with the aged care facility, the processes, the forms, I can set expectations. There's no surprises. My team, my admin staff know exactly how to complete it, even if it's hard, because it's all they're doing. And that means you can do a lot. You can be a lot more effective. There's less room for error. You're right. The amount of variables decreases, which means you can spend your time where it matters, creating a positive experience. Yeah.
And the thing I like to think about, scalability, because there's kind of, I don't know if it's just because I grew up in kind of middle class Australia where there's a tall poppy syndrome, and I talk about scale not as a way to make more money. It's actually so we can help more people. So when I talk about when we have these conversations and I say, do you want to grow a big team? Do you want to scale this? And it's not actually about, how much money can you make out of this venture? It's always just about people need this service. At Sky in insurance, people need insurance. We're incredibly underinsured country. And so if I can, and we had this conversation 2 days ago. I tried to convince you to go insurance only as well. I want more insurance only advisors in the market. Having scale allows us to impact more people and help more people. Advice is such a great profession where fundamentally our aim is to help people. And so scale, there's this dirty word, scale. It's all about this idea of cookie cutter approach. And it's no, how do we scale our business? So in my business, how do we get 1,000 people insured every year? How do we get 3,000 people insured every year? That's what scale kind of allows us. And that's why I kind of ask a lot of business owners about that.
Think about that on the other side too. If I don't want to run an empire, I want to be small, personable, and it's just me and a bit of support. And that's a lifestyle business for me, working. So in order for me to be at my best in those meetings, to give everything I can to someone going through hell, probably one of the hardest things I've done in a long time, I need to have, my cup needs to be empty so that I can fill it up. And if I'm spending my time grinding behind the scenes, I'm not fully available for that person at that time. So the more I can scale my processes at the back end, the more available I am, which means a far better client experience.
Yeah, and totally agree. So, I was going to actually ask you about that. What does the future hold? What are you going to do with your life from here on in, Nate?
Yeah, you heard it here first. I am going to become I'm going to join the circus, Phil. I might need some of your connections.
Mate, I just shared with my team my Bachelor of Circus Arts.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to go and do the trapeze. No, I would love to really lean into either or divorce or aged care a bit more. I think while I'm specialized with the people I work with, if one of those two really, really took off, I'd be happy to lean into that even more. I don't think I'm not going to build an empire. I'm not here to build out an advice army of 18 people. And much as I love working, I'd rather give back by helping other practices just in general conversation and that kind of thing. But I would, in the big picture, I'd love to be able to do a specialized version of advice, but it looks like aged care is really what I'm going to lean into, or divorce, or a bit of both. And do that regularly. in a way that fits in my lifestyle. That's where I'm at this point in my career, which, maybe it'll change in future. But yeah, I think I've worked too hard for too little earlier in my career. I hit burnout. I'm honest and open about that. I hit some pretty dark places, during my running my own business and all the rest of it. And I've found a real peace at the moment. And I want to keep that. I want to, be happy, funnily enough. And so I'm working in areas I enjoy and in areas where I can spend more time being me and get remunerated for it. So I think that's the direction. Exactly what it looks like, don't have an answer for you yet, but that's where we're moving.
I mean, look, I feel like I am like much more unique in terms of I've always actually been relatively clear on exactly my direction. But if you said to me, tell me exactly what my life's going to look like in 5 years' time, I'd still say I actually don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So I think that's very standard, normal viewpoint, and probably more candid than most people will do. Most people will bullcrap their way into some answer about the future. But in the reality is none of us have a clue. We could be dead tomorrow. So what does it all matter anyway?
Well, provided I have good life insurance, right, Phil?
Well, that's right. Yeah, as long as you've set it up properly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I took out my insurance when I was 21. So back when it was easy.
Yeah. Oh, so good. I love it. Mate, this has been so good. So in terms of how do people get in touch with you if they do have anyone going to aged care or clients, maybe going through a divorce and they need to maybe part ways with one of the, divorcing partners, like how do they get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is always the best. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I reply to most messages unless they're trying to flog me something. The big one is going to be, don't be afraid to go, hey, I've got this. I still want to run it myself. Like I've got this referral in. I really want to work with this person or my client's going through this. I'm happy to support that. And if it's a 15-minute call or a quick conversation, but I also one of the things I'm trying to do with this model that I'm running is if someone's got a complex estate matter and they don't know how to quite handle it or a complex aged care matter, think about who's good at it and bring them in and learn from them. If that's an area you want to get into but you've never done it before, don't just walk blindly. You're not doing your client service. Tell your client, hey, I'd love to work with you. I'm going to bring in this expert to just cover some of my gaps and then work on that basis. And I think that works really, really well. And that could be, if you've got divorcing couples and things like that, more than happy to help out. But I think that's really where we could start seeing some additional personalization going on in the industry. You work with the people you work with and we work together when we're crossing outside of our bounds. It's how we learn. It's how we grow. So I think that would be anything like that, more than happy to help. And if people need additional support and time, then I just charge for my time.
I've met one person in my 12-year advice career where they've said that they didn't want to share their information because they felt like it was their IP. And I ask a lot of people a lot of questions, and everyone is freely available. So anyone new in the industry, or even if you have historically been cautious, asking for help from other advisors, just really encourage everyone. Just ask questions. What's the worst that can happen? Is they're just going to say no. Okay, cool. Go to the next person.
100%.
So, mate, that's been really good. I do have 2 questions for you. When do you get a chance to do your emails?
I do all of my emails first thing in the morning.
And never again.
And then not again for the rest of the day. I try and peter old stuff towards the end of the day, but I've got it, if it's administrative work, I find that quite heavy. And so I match up my heavy work with my heavy times of day, which is the first thing in the morning or really late at night. Once I start doing meetings and things like that, I find it really hard to change codes back to admin mode. So that's when I do it. That's when I find it.
So good. I wish I was more disciplined. I ask everyone and I'm so undisciplined with my emails. Next question is, what interesting hobby do you have?
It won't surprise you that I say this. I like pretending, make-believe and rolling dice on tables. I play D&D. And it's I found it in my 30s and I wish I found it when I was 10. It's my favorite thing to do. It's the best.
Wait, you only found it in your 30s?
Yeah, I've been playing D&D for a year and a bit. Yeah,
wow.
I'm brand new to it. And it's the community is just really lovely, accepting people. It's good fun. There's lots of running jokes around, D&D being just a way to explore different parts of your personality and uncover trauma and then work through it and things like that. There's all that kind of fun stuff. But It is. It's super fun, do voices and have a bit of a laugh and lots of jokes. And yeah, it's a good social outlet. I really enjoy it.
Love it. That's a good one. That's one of the more interesting ones. John Catcher said he flies pigeons, so that was probably the most interesting hobby I've heard of. D&D's right up there.
Yeah, D&D's up there with flying pigeons. Yep.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Thanks, mate. I really appreciate you coming on. And if anyone wants to reach out to Nathan, as I said, if you've got divorce clients, if you've got aged care clients, and even if you just want support, I know Nathan's always happy to jump on the phone and have a chat. So thank you very much for coming on.
Absolutely.
If you've enjoyed this episode and you think someone else will get value out of it, I'd love it if you could forward it on to them. And as always, we can continue the conversation in the My Risk Advisor Facebook group. All you need to do, open up Facebook and search My Risk Advisor, and I'll see you in there.